You are in an unusual position as a candidate for governor in that you only joined the race a few weeks ago. The job of any candidate in any race is to sort of set their identity with the electorate. You've had a much less time to do that. How have you been going about doing that?
Well, it is unprecedented, and I don't think you could have prepared for the decisions that would, the ripple effect that they had from the top down, starting with the Republican nominee for president. Many people were surprised at the position Indiana played in determining who the presidential nominee would be, and then little did we know, not very long thereafter, Indiana would determine the ticket. And as that worked its way down to the gubernatorial race, I answered yet another call, and that's how I've kind of approached life, starting with the United States Navy when I was in the Navy, and couldn't have predicted it, didn't expect it, but simply answered the call. So ever since that decision was made by me and my wife, I've hit it hard day and night, have a day job, continue to do that, but wear two hats. And really it's almost, I've almost approached it as if a day equaled a typical week. Most people run these gubernatorial campaigns, you know, they're a year or 16 months long. We had T-minus 100 days. Now, having said that, I didn't start from a standstill. I was helping Governor Pence seek re-election at the time, and I have been involved in other gubernatorial races too. So over the last 12 years, I've made a lot of contacts, so I know where, not just where the counties are, but I know where good people are in every county. So it's made the travel easier than maybe a typical first-time statewide candidate would face, and we've just gone out and got her done.
The latest polling we've seen, public polling we've seen, has showed that the race is very tight, and there's a lot of undecideds out there, more than double in the Senate race, more than triple in the presidential race in Indiana. Yeah. So as you look to those undecideds,
sure,
what do you want them to know about Eric Holcomb?
I want them to know who I am, and first and foremost, what kind of person I am, and then also what experiences I've had. I think that actions speak a lot louder than words, and in terms of running for governor, I feel uniquely prepared, to be quite honest with you, having served since 2005 with our former governor, Mitch Daniels, who, in my estimation, turned this state around and ushered in Indiana's comeback. I was part of that new crew that came together to clean up the mess that we had inherited, and we hit it hard each and every day, and constantly set our sights to aim higher, as he used to say. And I've carried on that practice, and probably what attracted to me was his demeanor. And I've always tried to take organizations to the next level as well, and everything that I've ever been associated with. So it was a natural fit for me working with him, and then answering the call to Governor Pence, where he took where the state was, and we've just seen our trajectory improve each and every year, to where we now, as we sit, we have more people working in the private sector than we've had in the last 200 years. We've got a low unemployment rate. We've got a higher, 4.6. We've got a higher than the national average when it comes to the labor participation rate. We are a low cost of living state. We have the right tax and regulatory climates dialed in to where we remain this not just competitive, but a winning state against all of our competitors, not just in the country, but around the world. So we've become this magnet because we got that economy dialed in right. And I've been associated with that success over the last 12 years. And I think that's kind of the unique contrast between me and the opposition, and what voters will ultimately make the decision. Do we want to continue on this path, this upward trajectory, in my opinion, or go back to other ways that, again, had us in debt at the time?
Your time serving in public office numbers 5 months now, and you're running to serve in arguably the biggest public office in Indiana. Do you think that lack of actual time in public office hurts you?
No, not at all. Might be a plus, actually. Certainly, Governor Daniels, when he came into office, had not served one day in public office, and he was able to achieve through a lot of collaboration and putting forth ideas that he thought could turn around the state of Indiana. He was able to take us to new heights. Donald Trump, the guy running for President of the United States, hadn't served one day in office. So from previous governors to folks running for president. On the other hand, we've got Hillary Clinton, who's on their side, who has extremely high unfavorables in the state of Indiana. So I feel like Indiana has become a model that folks are around the country even pointing to, saying we don't want more of the same around the country. We want what Indiana's doing. And that's a model of success that I'm happy to champion, and a record I'm really proud to run on.
You talked about your time serving under Governor Pence. You talked about your time certainly serving under Governor Daniels. Two people who, while their conservative ideals were very similar, a lot of their ideas very similar, approached the job incredibly differently. And the question I get asked most by people who are interested in this race is, who is Eric Holcomb? Is he a Mitch or is he a Mike? I'm sure it's a question you've heard. Are you a Mitch or are you a Mike?
I'm an Eric, and proud of it. You know, I've had a lot of influences in my life, starting with my parents, and maybe the greatest was the time I served in the Navy. And if anyone's ever reported to a commanding officer or to an admiral, they would probably concur that those are pretty influential examples and mentors for me. Of course, I learned a lot. I wrote a book about Mitch Daniels. And so when you not just sit on the front row for 8 years and serve one former governor day in and day out for 8 straight years and 16 months prior to that on the campaign, I like to say I got a PhD in good government. We literally all turned the state around by executing a plan year after year after year after year. And then it was my honor then to join Governor Pence after Governor Daniels and keep the momentum going. And in fact, my style will be one that is, how do we accelerate our momentum? I think we have, obviously, we're an attractive state because of that momentum. Certainly our, not just neighbor states, but again, countries all over the world are competing for our business, the businesses that we're netting. I want to make sure that we create more separation between us and second place, third place, fourth place. And so I'm going to put my foot on the gas and keep the pedal to the metal and be hard charging about it as well. But that's my style. That's not any of my predecessors. And I think when you stop and think about Indiana and all the previous governors, I can't think of any successors that mirrored their former, the former governor. Certainly, on both sides of the aisle, by the way. And so the same will be true with me. I'll have my own style, and I like to be out on the court, and I like to be in perpetual motion and a lot of movement going on, and very transparent, and very accessible, and that will be my style. And I want to have agenda items that folks can coalesce around, and so that we can prove that Indiana, at first people were skeptical whether or not we could do big things. And I remember those early years in 2005, 2006, and when we had the pedal to the metal and we were doing so much, and people questioned whether or not we were ready for such abrupt change. Fast forward a couple years and people began to expect it. And it's been that proven Republican responsible leadership that I think has got us to this very solid footing with this strong foundation to build upon as the years ahead unfold.
So let's talk about some of those policy issues then.
Sure.
We'll start with what's first on really seems like everybody's mind, which is roads and bridges.
Yeah.
You've said that you're very interested in what's going on in the roads task force right now,
Yeah.
and what recommendation or information comes out of that.
Yeah.
But in talking to Luke Kenley, that's probable that won't come out until after the election. So as Hoosiers want to know from
Yeah.
the person who wants to be their next governor,
Sure.
what's your plan? I'll start with asking you a very specific question. Republicans in the House proposed a tax increase, the gas tax increase.
Yeah.
Is that something you'd support as governor?
Well, we're again, I'm the lieutenant governor, and so we're right in the middle of my plan, to be quite honest with you. We came out of a budget session before I was there, where we allocated dollars for road funding. Then we addressed that this last session, where we allocated more in a non-budget year, not just on state projects, but to local projects, and we're doing that now. I just came off the road 10 days or so ago, meeting with locals and making sure that those distributions were being made to the local communities and leveraging matching funds between the state and the locals. That's this year. Now, looking toward the next session, which we're doing, we came out of the last session and we said we're going to, as a committee, the first committee, as you allude to, we're going to collect real information, real data, and this decision is going to be data-driven. We all agree that we want a long-term, sustainable infrastructure program. We all agreed that we would keep everything on the table. And so I'll continue to, and I'm anxious about the product that comes out in December from the first committee. And I have remained one that has said, I'll honor my commitment. We'll keep everything on the table and we'll inventory where we're at, what our needs are, how much it will cost to address those needs, and how much we can afford. And then we'll figure out the way to actually pay for it. But what I'm not for is simply reverting back to those old days where we far outkick our coverage, where we're just borrowing away the future and leaving it for someone else to pay, where we're actually paving roads for 20 years, but we're paying for them for 30, for the next 30. And I don't want to just go raid pots. I want to figure out a comprehensive, and that's exactly what this committee's charge was coming out of last session, going into this one. So we're right, you know, we're in the fourth quarter, by the way, of that plan, and then we're going to start the next game, this next general session or assembly, and I'm excited about it.
You don't want to borrow too much. You want to limit that. Yet we hear from you, from Governor Pence, from every Republican, look at this AAA credit rating.
Yeah.
We've worked really hard to build that up. Well, if
Yeah.
you have a AAA bond rating, but you're not doing any bonding, then what's the point of a AAA bond rating?
Well, it helps other people. It does help locals in the whole
Sure.
state borrow on not just infrastructure projects, but what we don't want to do is borrow our way into debt and not have the money. And there's all kinds of creative ways that we need to approach this, keeping everything on the table. But when I hear the opposition just talk about borrowing as the answer, that's exactly the mess we got into, to where we borrowed our way into debt, and then we started delaying payments to local schools, and we delayed payments to local governments. And by the way, we didn't even start I-69. We just kept talking about it year after year after year. I lived in the southwestern quadrant of the state at the time, and I listened to every year folks talk about it. We're not just going to start I-69, we're going to finish I-69. I listened to people talk about this Hoosier Heartland, this road to nowhere going back to 1985. We never got around to it because we didn't have the money. So we heard about all these road projects, but we didn't have our economy dialed in to the point to where we were growing the pie, and we didn't have the money. It took a P3 and with major moves, the $3.85 billion, and then we said after that 10-year period of record investment, now where are we going to go? And now we find ourselves looking out, what is the next 10, 15 years, potentially 20? We still need to agree on what does long-term, how do you define long-term, or how do I define it? And I define it probably at least 10, 15 years out. Some would say 30. So it'll be a worthwhile discussion once the first committee comes back with their findings and their information, and that data starts to determine where we go next.
We saw this past session, Governor Pence came out with a plan, House Republicans came out with a plan, Senate Republicans came out with a plan, House Democrats came out with a plan, Senate Democrats came out with a plan. Is it your idea then that we won't have 14 different plans out there? Your hope is that the first committee will come out with a recommendation that everybody can coalesce around? Or will you have your own plan to present to the General Assembly?
Well, I'm sure I'll have parts that I strongly favor and maybe parts of it that I don't. But the good news is I have met with leaders in the legislature and members and expressed my eagerness to see the final product and my willingness to want to work together to get to that end goal, and that is funding a long-term sustainable infrastructure program.
Shifting to education, the state's voucher program continues to expand. There is no cap on it. Where would you like to see it go? I mean, there is no cap, so is it further expansion in some way, or do you feel like the organic growth that we've seen is where it should stay?
Well, I like the organic growth, and I hope that we can continue to meet the demand of parents that are seeking options. And I'm very deliberate when I say I don't think that that options necessarily have to compete with one another. I think that they can complement one another, and I want to continue to strive to try to meet that demand and not sacrifice. I want to strive to have the best public school education system in America, and if we're 7th in graduation rates, how do we become 6th and ultimately number 1? But certainly vouchers have been a very valuable option for many parents. I was with folks just yesterday morning who said how transformational it was for their child's life, and I wouldn't want to stifle or dial that back or take that away from them in any way.
Yet you want to see the best public schools in the country.
Yep.
Yet a lot of people feel like the continued growth of vouchers takes away from the goal of improving public schools.
I just don't see it that way.
There's only so much money in a pot at the end of the day.
And we're all seeking to educate children, right? And we're all seeking to best educate our children. And if a parent believes for whatever reason that there is an option that's better for them, why shouldn't they have that option? If it's all money going toward education and educating a child, why shouldn't there be that option? If that child is in a different venue, that should be funded if they're accredited.
In the funding, or in the public school funding arena, it's the money follows the child.
Yeah.
And yet that's created a scenario where rural, or particularly rural schools, inner city schools are starting to struggle to fund basic services. We've seen more and more tax referenda from school districts to try and pay for the basic services they provide their students. So is money following the child leading to an unintended consequence that we need to change?
No, I think that money needs to follow the child to the best place they can be educated per the parent's decision. And hopefully they have options. Some don't, and that could be as unfortunate as any other case I can imagine.
And on pre-K, obviously John Gregg has called for universal pre-K. You so far have said, let's just expand the existing pilot program. What does that expansion look like for you?
Well, again, I think it goes toward meeting the demand. I certainly think that we have 5 counties that Governor Pence, as you point out, started this pilot program. There were other counties that applied that didn't make it, that have accredited options already in the book. So I'd like to work our way toward meeting that demand right out of the gate. Not look at this as if it's universal. What I'd like to do is figure out, with those same folks I was just alluding to earlier, I'd like to figure out how we can move the people that are at the absolute back of the line to the front of the line, and the children that are the most disadvantaged among us. That's who I think we need to focus on. As we start, we'll see the chamber will submit a study and a report, I should say, on how this pilot program is working. And I think that data will be incredibly valuable as we continue to expand. I'm all in for pre-K, and what does that mean, and where do we start, and how do we responsibly, certainly by saying it's universal and by lowball and the cost of it doesn't get us there. We need to make sure that we're taking care of the folks that voluntarily want to put their children in pre-K, and start with the folks who can't afford it otherwise through the voucher system that we're using in this pilot program right now.
On the subject of, I suppose it touches health, touches public safety, it's Indiana's drug crisis, which is not unique to Indiana, of course. You've talked about that kind of three-pronged attack. It's the enforcement, it's the prevention, it's the treatment. In the treatment realm, we saw the creation of the syringe exchange in Scott County and in a few other counties. But in the most recent example, Clark County, which you cited at Eli Lilly the other day when we were there.
Yeah, that's right.
Clark County submitted the request. Months later, they finally got it approved, and there's still no funding because right now it's nonprofits who are funding this. If we want to be serious about preventing or about addressing this drug crisis, does the state need to get involved in helping these syringe exchanges function and thrive?
I think so.
And does that mean money?
It probably does. And it probably means changing the law to be able to address this so we can address this in a quicker, because right now we're kind of handcuffed in what we can and can't do and the speed at which we can act. But we need to arrest this issue in every way possible, and that probably calls for a quicker turnaround on services that are needed, like in Clark County.
East Chicago has started to dominate headlines around the state, as folks in East Chicago think it should have a long time ago. Are you satisfied right now with what's happening in terms of the response in East Chicago?
Well, from a state perspective, I am. As you know, this is a Superfund site that the EPA is the lead agency, so they are in charge. Folks have asked for the plan from them. We're trying to work with them as the locals are. So we're kind of balancing the respecting the local control, home rule, and the federal, the EPA lead agencies. Now that doesn't mean we're sitting back. We've had our staff up there, Department of Housing, Department of Health, ongoing services right now, not just from a funding perspective, but we are doing everything that we've been asked. The one thing I won't do, and I've sent word up to the mayor that I'm there if he needs me there, but the one thing I won't do is demagogue this issue or try to score political points. We've got the Department of Housing, we've got the Department of Health doing clinical screenings. We're helping fund housing for people in need of it, but we've got to work with the EPA, who is in charge of this and has been for more than months, been in charge for years.
You talk about it is a Superfund site, and so the EPA is the lead agency, but given where the federal government, whether it's a failure to act or at least it's slow to act by the nature of bureaucracy, does Indiana, not just in East Chicago, but should the roughly 30 or so other Superfund sites around the state, should Indiana preemptively start to look at how are we supporting those communities to make sure something like East Chicago isn't going to happen somewhere else?
Well, yeah, we need to take inventory, and we are, and that doesn't mean that we can override what the EPA and their authority as a state. But they know we're here. We're working with both the locals and the feds. We're somewhat sandwiched in between the two of them. But we want the feds and the locals to know that we're here. We've been here. We're going to be here till this thing gets cleaned up. But the EPA is the lead on this.
Whether it's more money for needle exchanges, it's funding, it's the continued organic growth of vouchers and an expansion of pre-K, and it's more road funding to address the needs we have.
I know where you're going with this.
It's money, and yet the Republicans in the State House and yourself and your predecessor, and who you hope to be your predecessors, have this strict adherence to the surplus level, the reserve level.
Yeah.
At some point, it seems like there comes a tipping point between where are we going to get the money while clinging to this reserve. So, is there a tipping point coming, and what happens when it does?
No, I don't see it that way. We'll continue to work with the bond raters to make sure that we protect that AAA credit rating that you mentioned that I bring up occasionally, which I do, admit it. We worked hard for it. But you don't want to get below a level to where you start to be downgraded. We've worked hard for this. What we've found is we need to continue to grow our economy, protect that AAA credit rating, and we monitor that. It's not like we just believe that you need to have $2.24 billion in your reserves just because. There's a direct correlation with what your credit rating is, and so that's where I would start. I would, if the bond raters, set at 2.2 would be sufficient to maintain a AAA credit rating, and then I'd look there. But I wouldn't look at sacrificing that credit rating just to spend the money now and then have to pay for it more later.
At the same time, though, if you look at all these needs, and I think you would agree that the roads and education and health are critical needs.
Absolutely.
And if you look at all these needs where more money is in some cases the answer, and we're not talking about even cutting in half the reserve,
no,
bringing it down to 1.8 billion, even if that's below where the bond raters say you want it to be, is the first priority just maintaining the AAA rating?
I think you don't have to sacrifice our AAA credit rating. The beautiful thing about our process is we do come together every year. This year being why maybe that's money, money, money. It sounds like that's the common theme. This is a budget session, and this is where folks were the issues that you raised and a lot of other issues. One of my central points will be how do we maintain that economic climate overall and maintain that attractive tax and regulatory climate so that we are attracting about every other day. It seems like we're announcing new jobs that are coming here are going to be created in the relatively near future. That's the way that we fund the services that we need to provide as a state, in my opinion, and that's the way we've been able to increase K through 12 spending by $474 million. We didn't dip into the $2.24 billion when we needed almost a half a billion increase into public school education. We grew our economy, we grew that base and brought in more revenue, and we're on that trajectory to continue to do that. And I simply don't want to go back to the old ways that got us in debt.
When Mike Pence was campaigning for this office in 2012, he was coming into a situation where there had been a bunch of tax cuts enacted, a bunch more tax cuts on the books, and he was running on more tax cuts than he did through most of his time over the last 4 years. Given how many tax cuts are already enacted, and where it's put us in terms of those business climate rankings and the tax rankings, and given that there are still more tax cuts on the books to come,
that's right.
Is the time now to take a pause on any further cuts?
I don't know if I would say take a pause on it. They're not prominent on my plan as it is right now. I've taken, as you mentioned, I've been at this 4 weeks, going on 5 weeks, and I thought it would be, or believed it would be the most thoughtful way to approach this would be to seek input from actual Hoosiers and taxpayers. They are in fact the client and my boss. And so I've taken some weeks to make sure that I'm getting around the state, making myself accessible, listening to what's important on other people's minds, meeting with the legislature. After all, they're the folks that I, as you point out, will have the pleasure of working with to lead this state forward. And the call for tax cuts hasn't popped up anywhere as I get around the state, more tax cuts. We are in a uber competitive position right now in terms of our tax climate and our regulatory climate. We've always got people nipping at our heels, other states that are trying to compete, wanting to know what we're going to be doing next. I'll be leaning heavily into what are ways that we can continue to diversify our economy and therefore strengthen it. also leaning heavily into supplying our economy with a trained workforce, which will be one of my be a central focus when you talk about economic development, is making sure that we're training and in many respects retraining the 21st century workforce that's just demanded right now. And infrastructure plays into that, and trying to remain competitive from an energy perspective plays into your economic development. Certainly your, on the education front, getting a child on a pathway that goes from a good education, which they can receive and from my perspective and have options and where they best can receive that education. But I hope that that education ultimately leads to an occupation that in turn leads to a fulfilling career.
Speaking of that idea of talking to Hoosiers around the state, you've mentioned that on the subject of LGBT rights, you don't hear a lot about that from them out in parts of the state, though there's certainly obviously a large number of Hoosiers who care about the subject.
Sure.
And it is certainly something that dominates a lot of discussion
Yeah.
in the legislature. So I will ask a very specific question about it.
Yeah.
If a bill comes to your desk as governor, that's the 4 words and a comma, the simply adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the state civil rights code, would you sign it?
You're giving me a hypothetical, and you're saying if, and nothing that I've seen over the last year, in fact the last month, leads me to believe at this time that that will in fact happen. And so I do understand that and agree with you that there are passionate, sincere people on both ends of the end of this spectrum, this issue. We did not see much progress in this last committee, and I tend not to focus very much of my time in areas that have a almost 0% probability of moving forward. If this, in the future, if there appears to be some progress or movement one way or another, we'll evaluate it when it becomes not, when it moves from a hypothetical to a reality. But it's, in my estimation, I see the state, the whole state, and right now we've got this balance where some counties are for HROs and some counties aren't. We've got the courts involved, and even on that front, who may weigh in. And again, I'm focused on my kind of 4 areas that I think can continue to move our state to the next level. And this issue has in the past been obviously a very divisive issue. My opponent has spent literally millions of dollars talking about this one issue, almost like a broken record. It's just skipping on one note. I'm going to focus on the things that are going to continue to move this state forward. The state has been moving forward since this debate first started. Thankfully, the job creators, we've seen new job after new job announcement ever since this debate started. And I'm happy that for the most part the state has moved on and forward, and when it has come up the few times that it has, and I've said this before, it's almost out of exhaustion. Like, are we having this conversation again? So if it gains steam and seems to progress, we'll monitor it, and that's what I've told anyone that's ever asked me about it.
You want to be the leader of the state. Why do you think then the people who are going to vote for you don't deserve to know where you stand on the issue? I mean, whether it's being a leader in favor of LGBT expanding rights, or it's a leader on the other side. There are certainly a lot of people, and certainly a lot of people in your party, who would like to see you come out and say, I am not in favor of this. Why not be a leader?
Because the state is not in agreement on this as well, and that's been my experience. I don't have to agree with everyone 100% of the time, or agree with 100% of the people 100%. There is real tension on this issue. There is disagreement from good people on both ends of this spectrum. And I just haven't seen any advancement or progress on the issue, starting with the last session when we debated this. And it ended up going nowhere. And then most recently at the committee, where there was very little progress on this issue, if any. And I am going to lead this state when it comes to economic development, community development, striving to have the best public school education system in America, and delivering good state government at a great taxpayer rate.
Your former boss, Mitch Daniels, once famously said we need to take a pause on social issues, the divisive social issues, and you brought that up, that this is a divisive issue, and that's partly why you're staying away from it. Mike Pence, not so much staying away from the divisive social issues. So where would you like to take the state on things like gay rights or more abortion laws that seem to constantly get struck down in the courts and spending more tax dollars to defend those ultimately losing causes?
Well, I'm going to spend my time laser focused on those 4 areas that I just articulated. Economic development, community development, striving to have the best public school education while still giving parents options, and making sure that we're delivering good state government service at a great taxpayer rate.
A small issue here to close things out. Well, not small, but a more specific issue. The recent controversy, and you've mentioned I-69 earlier and putting that into practice, but now we've seen a bit of a scandal erupt as the lead company isn't paying its subcontractors. And the mismanagement involved certainly from that company, but I'll start with, I guess it's 2 questions. The first is, what needs to happen to make sure that that project isn't delayed and delayed and delayed further and further?
Well, these things have happened in the past. We're going to hold the contractor responsible for payment. We've gotten through them in the past. We'll get through this as well. I-69, I'm happy to report, was started under Republican leadership. It's going to hopefully be finished under Republican leadership. In fact, we won't just build it, we'll expand it. We'll be building a bridge in Evansville that's going to connect our 2 states and finally connect countries, actually, Mexico to America to Canada. And so I'm proud of where we're going with I-69. It was a figment of people's imagination for decades. It became a reality on our watch. I was part of that, and I look forward to completing it.
The criticism over this from your opponents right now is that, yes, it is the company's fault, but it is a sign also of you and Mike Pence taking your eye off the ball because, well, Mike Pence doesn't spend much time in Indiana anymore, and you're obviously doing, as you talked about, the day equals a week of campaigning for you. Yeah. So is it fair for some Hoosiers to wonder who's really running the state right now?
No. It's rich that someone that lived in the southwestern quadrant most of his life, who heard since the Korean conflict, people talk about the need for I-69, year after year after year, having served as Speaker of the House, the guy that has a lot of authority over the state's budget, certainly did when he was there, who never found a way to even mix a bag of concrete, let alone start building I-69. We are building it, and we are approaching the completion of it. And then we will build a bridge over the Ohio River. So I take that criticism with a grain of salt. We'll finish the road that I suspect he's been driving on because we started building it.
That's everything I have.